Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jared Hornsby, and I'm here today to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. But before we get started, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Reducing the Digital Friction in the Digital Workplace. Here's today's timing breakdown. These numbers are rough, so please don't hold us to these. At any point during today's webinar, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to submit using the Ask a Question tab on the left side of your screen. You can chat with your fellow attendees by clicking the audience chat that's also at the bottom. Please let us know where you're joining from in the audience chat as well. I'd love to see where everybody's coming from. Here's a little bit more about Reworked. We were founded in 2020, covering digital workplace experiences, and we cover the primary topics that you see here on this slide. And you can learn more about us by visiting our website at rework.co. Our Connect conference is coming up in Austin, Texas. We have a chance for you to win a free ticket. It'll be next week, so stay for our post-event survey for a little bit more information on that. I want to thank today's sponsor, Workgrid. Workgrid is guided attention technology that focuses employees' attention on the critical moments that matter the most. You can learn more about them at workgrid.com. And now it's time to introduce today's speakers. Janine.
Thank you, Jared. So excited to be here today. And joining me is Brad from Igloo Software, and we've decided to partner together to discuss the problem of digital friction within the digital workplace due to our shared values on improving the employee experience. For today's webinar, we want to kick it off with looking at the current state of the digital workplace. And now we don't want to bore you with probably all the stats that we're all very familiar with, but we do want to take a look at some of the root causes and problems on how we got here so that we can create and address those root causes. Next, we're going to have a little fun and demonstrate the Workgrid Digital Assistant. We want to showcase what the workday could look like if employees were guided and connected with the right information and experiences based on their needs throughout the day, which is very much a different experience than most of our employees experience the workday today when using technology. We'll share real feedback and ROI stats from customers using our joint solution, the Igloo Digital Workplace and the Workgrid Digital Assistant. And we'll discuss tips for success on how to design experiences around your employees' needs. Let's get started. It's no doubt today's work environment has undergone a major shift in recent years. There's been extra pressure on our organization to meet the growing demands of its staff, and technology, of course, is being called upon to bear the biggest workload with these changes. During the pandemic, there was, and really still today, there's no sign of stopping. It's just been a run-on of procuring technology to meet the needs of hybrid and remote workforces. Now, most of this technology that has been rolled out, it's likely best-in-class software, right? And although we might all each have our individual favorites and likely a lot of software that we probably don't care for as well, most of the tools out there today are actually good at what they do. The problem, however, is when we take a step back and look at the experience of having to use all these different technologies from the employee's point of view, it's a disjointed experience. Recent research from 451 Research shows that only 25% of employees feel that their work tools help them accomplish their priorities faster. And while we view this due to the rapid pace of siloed applications being added, the user experience also plays a role, which we will touch upon in a little bit. And this is because, as most times when new software is rolled out, there is little guidance on what to use when, as apps are not built with the end user in mind. And many tools also have overlapping features, so they confuse employees and cause frustration. To be honest, this would have been hard to avoid over the last couple of years. As digital transformation has happened at such a rapid pace, many organizations actually underwent digital transformation efforts faster in 2 years than they may have in the last 10 years. So even though digital transformation efforts have evolved, the way we procure software hasn't changed over the last decade. Systems and tools have always been acquired and adopted in silos. And that's because each department has their own budgets, objectives, and projects, and they purchase and build software based on their needs. And what we found is through all these digital transformation efforts, rather than technology helping us achieve our goals, it's actually unintentionally causing digital friction. So, what we want to do is take a moment to run a survey, and we want to understand from our audience what is the biggest factors of digital friction are at your organization. Load the survey. And digital friction, for those that might be unfamiliar with the term, that's the unnecessary effort that's required to use the technology we have at work. All right, we have some responses coming in here.
Yep, looks like we've got quite a lot in favor of context switching. So option B, context switching, we're seeing a lot of continuous logging in and out of systems. But as I said that, we do see that that stat has drastically changed, and now we see information finding is leading the charge so again, tracking down files, details, and information. Context switching bringing up a very close second, and again, that's the continuous logging in and out of systems. This is an interesting poll to watch because the results are changing. We're pretty much neck and neck with the, in fact, we are exactly tied. Items B and C, context switching and information finding would be the two biggest ones. A little bit of action for pings and dings, option A, and distractions would bring up the tail end presently with 18% of the vote. And yeah, looks like we're pretty much final here. Oh, no, a couple more votes coming in.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for taking that survey. It's probably no surprise with all those tools we just looked at being procured. We are context switching. We're context switching, more and more, and this is causing a poor employee experience. It's impacting employees' productivity. It's hindering our employees from reaching their potential. Really, what you hired them to do. And we all struggle with technology at work. It's a universal problem, and it's interesting because it's something we've dealt with for a while. Obviously, since the pandemic, it's gotten worse. And I know, Brad, you work really closely with customers, understanding their needs, and you probably talk a lot about digital friction. Can you share with us why organizations haven't necessarily solved for digital friction in the past, or maybe better said, what challenges they've been up against?
Sure, thanks, Janine. Absolutely happy to share that. We all really struggle with technology at work, and really comes down to the idea of a problem, but whose problem is it? And is it a universal problem? Is it an organizational problem? Is it an individual problem? And the answer really is it's all of those things. So quite often what we see is the first limiter is really that idea of learned helplessness. It's the way we've always done things. It's the worst thing we can say in any sort of progressive nature. Well, it's the way we've always done things. But with digital friction, it's the truth. People come on and join an organization, and it becomes a very learned experience. It's just historically the way we do things. We bake in new apps, and that process grows. But there's never anyone, or I shouldn't say there isn't anyone. It takes an individual to come in, or a group to come in and start to change that. And that brings us, of course, to point two, which is that in a lot of organizations, halting or forestalling digital friction, is really no one's job, and therefore they lack the dedicated resources to do so. If we don't have someone who's spearheading the charge in reducing digital friction, then the problem, of course, can be that we just don't have those dedicated resources. We don't have budget, we don't have time, and of course that can just help to continue the problem in its life cycle. We also look at walled applications and technological limitations. So we mentioned the idea of individual departments deploying the technology that they need, that sort of thing, certainly. So we have kind of a disparity between the tools that are seen as needed for a particular department versus those needed for the organization, that sort of thing. And then technological limitations quite often come into the play when we start looking at applications that maybe aren't as friendly in terms of maybe APIs talking to each other, so we can't integrate things like that. Or we simply haven't got that documentation, we haven't got that information shared, so we don't know whether or not those apps would integrate. Again, if it's no one's job, no one's explored that. No one's explored the usefulness to the company. And then, of course, competing internal priorities. Hand in hand with that departmental discussion goes the idea of, I have a department that I'm running. I have technology that I need for that department to do its job. Some of that may contribute to the organization, but what I'm concerned about as a manager is how my department runs. And in a lot of cases, that's what we see, is there's that very siloed behavior. And then finally, we have that rapidly changing work model. We've done the whole idea of the pandemic very, very thoroughly, but certainly it did launch this great work from home strategy, which then became a kind of work from anywhere, hybridized work. We do have a lot of back to the office, certainly, but we see a very dispersed work model, and there's a lot of applications that have come to the fore to support that. We've got a lot of people in dispersed work roles that are bringing in their own applications, that sort of thing, and it's really creating kind of a scattershot method of achieving work, really backpedaling from the idea of that digital unity and creating that aspect of digital friction.
That makes a lot of sense, Brad. I think there's certainly quite a bit of change management organizations will need to go through, and really behavior change as well, in addition to using technology to help. Now, when I say use technology to help, the key for solving for digital friction using technology is not about replacing the technology we have. We just implemented, a lot of new technology, and it's not that the technology is necessarily bad. We discussed many of that technology is likely best in class. And the amount of data we have in the enterprise, it's only going to increase over time. So there's no turning down the dial on information and data. We can't just put a halt to that, especially as we see advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So it's actually a filter or an experience problem. We as organizations need to filter the information and data for our employees. So rather than putting the burden on our employees to search and click around. So we saw on the survey context switching and trying to find information. If you think about how much time is wasted trying to find information, and then we're not sure if the information they find is accurate, right? Are people using out-of-date data to make decisions that can have real impact to your business? So we need to provide employees with a personalized experience that actually guides and connects them to the information they need when they need it so they can work more efficiently. And this actually isn't a foreign concept in the world of the customer experience. This is exactly what the majority of companies do. The customer experience is all about removing friction points to complete a purchase or a transaction. And brands usually go a few steps beyond to ensure you're not able just to complete that purchase, but make sure the experience of doing so is a good one. And it's one that's personalized and contextualized to you. And that's the methodology we need to apply for the employee experience. One that really warrants that end-to-end focus. Again, you mentioned ownership, Brad, really has ownership. So someone is owning what that experience looks like for employees. And it's very similar to the customer of what, brands do for the customer experience. There are a lot of examples out there today. You all probably know what your favorite apps are, and you love all the intelligent things that it does for you and personalized information and recommendations it provide. I think Uber is a great example to look at because on the surface, Uber aims to make transportation easy and reliable. They have an incredibly easy to use app, and it handles high traffic, lots of complex data and systems on the back end. But for you and I, it's an extremely easy app to use. It's tailored to me as an individual based on my preferences, where I'm located, and it's continuously updates to always provide a relevant experience. As the end user, I'm completely abstracted from what's happening behind the scenes. And behind the scenes is a giant infrastructure consisting of thousands of services and an enormous amount of data in order to operate and run the Uber app. Now imagine if Uber made you log into multiple apps to set up a ride. Nobody would use the app, right? We rely on it and use it because it's easy and it's convenient. But at work, we as employees don't really have a choice. We have to manage and use technology in its native form rather than having an experience built around our needs. So again, similar to Uber, what we're looking to do is where you have the back end infrastructure, or you have all your systems of record, you have your information and your data, and that lives in the background. We're not removing that from your tech stack, but we're creating a front end user experience to deliver to our employees that's designed to deliver an intuitive experience that's based on their needs and the outcomes that we want them to achieve. And it's a shift in thinking in terms of how we roll out technology. We need to change our focus from delivering systems to delivering experiences, where every interaction is carefully considered and designed around the end employee's needs. And this shift is what Workgrid and Igloo believe will be the next chapter for the digital workplace. So from digitizing the digital workplace to delivering guided and intelligent experiences. So, what we want to do next is explore what would the workday look like if we took this approach to design experiences around employees' needs. I'm going to hand it over to Brad in just a moment here to walk you through two employee personas and how a digital assistant can guide employees with a personalized experience. Again, that's connecting them to the information they need so they can work more efficiently.
Thanks, Janine. And as Janine mentioned earlier, we have partnered, and we at Igloo Software have partnered with the folks at Workgrid to create what we call the Igloo Digital Assistant living within the Igloo Digital Workplace. So what we're going to look at today is how the Igloo Digital Assistant living within this context can support two distinct roles. We've got a day in the life, as we're calling this, the day in the life of a manager, first off, and then we'll get into somebody who's a little bit more frontline. But what we're really looking at is contextualization, the idea of what sorts of things might support a manager's workday in terms of how they progress through the things they need to know, actions they can perform, that sort of thing. And then how does that translate to someone who's maybe a little bit more towards the sharp end of things? So looking at the idea of someone who's not necessarily managerial, but more functionary in their role. Can we have benefits to them as well? And we found we certainly can. So let's meet our manager, getting right into it. So the first individual that we have is Emily, and Emily is a communications manager. She lives in a suburb outside of Boston. She has a hybrid working style. She works between her home and the office in Boston. So Emily is going to start her day, and we're going to get right into the first action that Emily performs, which is, well, good morning, Emily. She is going to be working in the office today, but she's going to start her day at home. She logs into her computer, into her digital workplace, and right away she sees her digital assistant giving her a summary overview of what's on her calendar for the day. So she's just getting that, again, that surfacing of all her commitments for the day. She's got a very important and busy day coming up with some meetings in the afternoon. And the visual that we're looking at here is a notification coming through the digital assistant, coming from Office 365 and pushing a notification that details the individual's calendar for the day. So we have that quick overview. And of course, then Emily's got that context, and she's ready to really start the day. But before she does, Emily, of course, wants to ask that question that's on everyone's mind. She's headed into the Boston office for today. Does she want to pack a lunch? Does she want to order from the cafe? Does she want to go out? So she uses the chatbot feature on the digital assistant to quickly ask, what's on the lunch menu? Now, you'll notice in the visual here that Emily has received, I mentioned she lives in Boston. She's going into the Boston office today. Notice it is the Boston menu. And the reason for that is she wasn't sent a hyperlink to the cafeteria webpage with multiple menus. She was sent the Boston menu because her chatbot sent her a personalized response knowing that she's based in Boston. So she's got a profile that lives in and talks to the digital assistant, letting the digital assistant know what information to surface prominently to Emily based on where, of course, Emily is based. So again, we see a savings in time simply because she doesn't have to dig through a long website, a PDF, anything like that, and she's being presented with information that is relevant to her for the case, in this case, the very important case of lunch. So Emily is going to hop on the train, and this is where we get into the idea of a little bit more action. Getting we've seen information and notifications. Now we're getting into action, and what we're seeing on screen here is Emily has opened up. She's logged into her digital assistant again, into the digital workplace, and she's seeing notifications popping up that are telling her that she has expenses to approve. She's got mileage requests, whatever the case may be. She's got, as I mentioned, a team of people, and they're submitting expenses. This is one of the biggest we'll call it a time vacuum in the day in terms of just formulating approvals. We have to log into the parent system, that sort of thing. And of course, that context shifting. So in this case, Emily's presented with these notifications and has the ability to approve these things directly from the digital assistant. So allowing that everything's in line, and as we saw on screen, she does have the ability to review some of this information. She can easily and quickly review and approve these approvals at a time savings very, very quickly, and she knows that it's done. That's one more thing off her plate for the day, which of course is very important when you're busy. So Next up, Emily arrives at the office. Her train was on time. She arrives at the office. Likely she's got a coffee in hand and she is ready to go. She sits down at her desk, once again, opens up her laptop. She's logged into the digital workplace and she sees a notification from their CEO, Leslie in this case. And Leslie sent out a notification of a new strategic plan. So we see a video here. Emily has seen that as a notification. I'll draw the attention here really quickly to the screenshot. So what we see these little icons appearing on the left in the digital workplace. This is the digital assistant in action. We're seeing to knows, which are the flags. We're seeing to do's, which are some of the things, the actions we can undertake. We can see apps, which we're going to talk about a little bit more as the talk progresses here. And then finally, ask. We're seeing that chatbot feature. So this is where these notifications are being engineered. And in this case, she would have received a to know notification letting her know that this particular strategic plan has been released. She's obviously excited to hear that and wants to sit back and watch that while she's enjoying her coffee in her office. But again, notified of this very timely information within the context of the digital workplace. Now, as I mentioned off the top, Emily had a busy mid-morning of meetings. She's kind of working right through, and she finally gets back to her desk at 3 p.m. And the first thing the digital assistant is going to do is notify her that she has some unresponded messages from Microsoft Teams. So this is just a gentle nudge. It's the idea that Emily was paying attention during meetings, so she wasn't answering Teams. She opens the digital workplace. She immediately receives a notification that you do have some Teams questions as far as things go. And it's just a reminder that you've got these follow-ups. So it's again, a very nice piece to have, making sure that she keeps up with her communications without having to, once again, context shift to Microsoft Teams to find that out. The digital assistant then is going to generate another notification. In this case, what we're looking at is a sales quote. So you can see this is a Salesforce notification. One of her team has gone out and gotten a quote together for an organization. Emily is able to review this, as we can see on screen here. She's able to review and to approve this in flight. So again, very quickly, she doesn't have to log into Salesforce to do this. That's not to say she wouldn't necessarily, but if everything is on the table here and she's got the request details and this is something that she was expecting, very quickly she can go ahead and approve this instead of having to go find the same thing in Salesforce and maybe going from email to Salesforce and then back to where she was if she remembers what that place happens to be. Next up, Emily's gone for a little bit of a coffee, so she sits down, coffee in hand, and she's opening up her browser. This is automatically, again, as I've implied, connecting her to the company intranet and therefore the digital assistant. And she sees a notification providing her some helpful insights into high and low performing content from the past week. So this is something that's really cool and critical with the Igloo Digital Assistant is, as a publisher, as someone who has some maybe some administrative or governance-based responsibility within the digital workplace, Emily is able to see how her content is performing. And it's really important to understand this because, of course, we want to ensure that we're reaching the right people. We want to ensure that our numbers are meeting our expectations as far as things go. And it's just a nice, helpful reminder to let Emily know that these publications are either performing well or in some cases poorly, because then, of course, if they're performing poorly, Emily can make the decision to maybe surface that in a greater context. So that's what we're looking at there. And then building on that point with the idea of Igloo-based notifications, digital workplace-based notifications, there's also sentiment analysis. So we're looking at the idea of the intranet sentiment app in this case, and it's helping content authors understand how their content is being received by readers. It's going to send a notification with a sentiment analysis, either positive, negative, mixed, neutral, based on comments. So it's looking at the language in comments and determining whether or not that is meeting one of those criteria in terms of sentiment. So again, important in understanding your overall reach to the audience, both in terms of read numbers, as we saw on the previous screen, but also in terms of sentiment where people are leaving comments. It's a good context to have in terms of determining published content and what you want to and how you surface it within the digital workplace and to the organization at large. Finally, Emily is at the end of her day. And before wrapping up for the day, that Salesforce notification, the quote went out, and good news, the quote has come back. She's gotten a notification that she has a little something to celebrate. We've already got a closed status for this Salesforce quote, so we can see it's been updated to closed one. Again, just a nice little thing on the way out the door. Emily knows that this has been taken care of and is leaving the office in a good mood. So that's Emily, and we can see from the context of things like looking at those publication and governance, looking at some of the approvals, things like that, right down to things like the nudges for Teams conversations, the lunch menu, things like that, how this really strives to support her. The next business case we're going to look at is, again, more an employee, so more of a functional role. And we're going to look at our employee. And our employee in this case is a fellow named Joe. And Joe works as a sales development professional in Toronto. He works from home 100% of the time. So Joe is going to start his day, and he's sitting in his favorite sunny seat here. He's greeted with his morning schedule for the day. So again, we're seeing that My Day app. He's already seeing his calendar commitments. Just has that kind of refresh and reset understanding of, okay, I'm logging in, level set. Here's what's going on for my day in the context of the things that I've committed to. So very similar to Emily. But the next thing that Joe's going to receive, which is really kind of cool, is an idea of who is out of the office. So we have an out of office notification for some of Joe's teammates. So he's going to receive this notification letting him know that 3 of his team members have time off this week. And of course, this is going to help him prepare for the fact that maybe he's got to take on a little extra work. Maybe he was thinking of reaching out to somebody, whatever the case may be. It's a nice, helpful reminder that his teammates are out. And this is just simply coming in, again, via the to know aspect of the digital assistant. Next up, and I really like this use case. This is, well, we're calling it Let's Chat. And basically what's happened is Joe's had a little trouble with his VPN. So he's using the chatbot within the digital assistant to submit a ticket to his IT team. So he's using the chatbot to create it. As we can see in the animation here, we can see the title of the ticket and everything that Joe is providing in terms of information. The chatbot is ensuring him that the ticket is being created. So this can integrate with things like Zendesk, ServiceNow, or Jira, and really offers that turn-by-turn experience within the digital assistant itself in order to start that help process. So within a few seconds, Joe is going to see he has an IT ticket submitted, and he hopes help is on the way soon, as we all do when we have these technical issues. But moreover, he has that sense of relief. He doesn't have to wait on hold with anybody. He doesn't have to get into email exchange. He doesn't have to go onto Zendesk and file a ticket or whatever the case may be. He has that ticket filed and ready to go. So he can move on with other portions of his day now. And speaking of other portions of his day, the next thing we have up is training. So what we're looking at here is a Cornerstone reminder. So this could be an LMS like Cornerstone, hence we use the example here. But he is able to, or moreover, the digital assistant is able to surface training notifications within the digital assistant. You can see the key line there is the new required training has been assigned to you. Again, it's that personalization aspect. So Joe is seeing training that's assigned to him, not necessarily to his team, not to everybody in the company, but to him as a user. And this is very important. One of the key aspects really that can support the idea of that reduction in digital friction is that aspect of personalization. What's relevant to me? What is necessary for me in order to get my job done? So taking a bit of a different turn, the next thing we see is a time off recommendation. So Joe is, we're leveraging here data that exists within O365. So looking at the idea, perhaps he hasn't had a day off in 2 months, something along those lines. And this is just a nudge. Now, Joe is being reminded that, hey, Joe, you haven't had time off in a little while. So maybe this is something that you might want to take at some point. On the other side of the screen, we were seeing the idea of reminders, or we do have reminders, pardon me. We have a series of apps, and they can let Joe know vacation time he has remaining. They can let him know his pay period, that sort of thing. And this, again, helps to contextualize that idea of he hasn't been taking time off in a while. Does he have time remaining? Absolutely he does. When's he getting paid? That sort of thing. All very important stuff to know in terms of this. And of course, contributing to that employee health. He's taking a day off. Next thing up, Joe is on some sales calls. So we have an application. This is just a world clock app that we input into the digital assistant, falling under apps. And what we're looking at is the idea of just world clocks. What time is it in the various zones he wants to call? So he can plan his calls accordingly and make sure he is corresponding with the business day wherever in the world he happens to be engineering those calls. So just kind of a neat little feature there. Next up, we have satisfaction. We have a ticket closure. The IT team has gotten back to Joe, and we can see that the ticket has now been resolved. Joe knows he can access the VPN. Once again, that communication has come back through the digital assistant as a notification. So he can see very quickly right away that has been taken care of as far as things go. And then finally, and this one I really like as well, what we get into is a survey notification. So in this case, we're looking at a survey application it could be built into the digital assistant tool. It could be an integration with something like a Survey Monkey, that sort of thing. But we're gathering employee sentiment analysis, that sort of thing. And Joe is, again, being reminded, as we can see in the graphic, that this survey is here. He can elect to take the survey. The survey is then conducted, and we can more easily elicit response. We're not having to steer Joe to a Google Doc someplace or whatever the case may be. Again, we're surfacing this within the context. Moreover, we're surfing the reminder within the context of the Igloo digital assistant that lives within Joe's digital workplace. So I'm sure looking at both of these, you can appreciate how we can support individuals within their workday using the digital assistant. But one of the things that we like to say at Igloo quite often is that we like to say we drink our own champagne. And one of the things that we've implemented, of course, at Igloo within our own digital workplace is the Igloo Digital Assistant. And I want to just tell you a little bit about that in terms of what we've seen and what we've learned, both internally as an organization and when we look towards our customers. So as I mentioned, Igloo has implemented the digital assistant for all its employees. We immediately saw value in the internal and external system notifications. This first thing we heard, we implemented it for managers first, and we heard a lot of great hue and cry from our managers that this was a wonderful thing. They were able largely to process approvals, things like that. But moreover, it's just the streamlining of processes and the easy conveyance of information. Notifications themselves are easily digested. They present the user with a personalized view of what they should know. Managers were able to very quickly see and triage approvals, and we also support users with personalized applications, as we saw kind of in our Joe example. Now, speaking personally, and this is Brad speaking, speaking personally, the digital assistant for me engineered almost an instantaneous behavior change in the way I look at notifications. So we all have our Outlook pop-ups on if we're using Outlook, and it pops up usually in one of the corners of your screen and says, hey, you have an incoming email. I still have my Outlook pop-ups on. They still pop up, but I don't find I click on them anymore, because if I see that that's coming from the Igloo Digital Workplace, our digital workplace, I immediately, because I'm always logged into the digital workplace, I go to the to know bar, because I know where there's an email, there's going to be a to know, and where there's a to know, there's a link I can click on to get to the information that I need. So I'm not popping into Outlook to do this. I'm working within my digital workplace, which is where I'm intended to be. So it's a small behavioral change. It's a little bit of a time saving, but times that by every Brad in the company, if you will, not to say we're all Brads, but you get the idea. It can snowball very, very quickly in terms of that time change. So then pivoting a little bit to the idea of what are our customers seeing in terms of the value prop for the digital assistant? The centralization of notifications can't be overstated. The idea that we're creating that hub-like behavior, that centralization of the digital workplace itself within the corporate ecosystem as a single source of truth. So it's increasing that value prop by making the digital workplace a focal point of the employees' day-to-day behavior. Manager level staff, they're seeing value with the simplification of the approvals process. Digital workplace managers and administrators are seeing value in the Igloo-based notifications that comment on the relevance, timeliness of content, user sentiment. And then finally, end users see value in the personalized notifications, applications, and the easy-to-use chat featuring, which can steer them towards other information and allow them to self-serve a lot more within the digital workplace. Janine.
That's great. Really appreciate you sharing your own personal experience, Brad. We at Workgrid also drink our own champagne. And I got to say, my favorite app is the Salesforce app, which we saw Emily using. And, I don't need to be in Salesforce every day. I am a user, but I don't log in that often. And through the digital assistant, I can get notified anytime an opportunity status change has happened, such as a closed one opportunity. It's really great because every employee receives this notification. And so I think back to when we used to work in the office, and some companies that I worked for maybe had like a bell we would ring, and it would really drive engagement and keep people excited, celebrate the moment. But virtually, you kind of lose that. So it's really nice to know that everyone gets an alert delivering the exciting news, and then you usually see, Slack start lighting up with people celebrating. So sometimes it's those really small delighters that the employees love. Okay. And so what we want to do next, and I think we showed some really interesting examples of the digital assistant, and really regardless if you implement a digital assistant or not, the purpose of this webinar is really focusing on delivering improved employee experiences for your employees. And we discussed how these experiences should be experience driven, and how a digital assistant is one example of technology that allows you to create that guided experience, leveraging your existing technology stack, not replacing it. But we wanted to also touch upon some tips on how you might be able to get started on building out a business case, and what types of experiences you could get started with, and how you actually get started looking for, what processes you should look to improve for employees. We'll also look at the importance of building out employee personas and user studies, and designing experiences based on employees' intent, and leveraging your existing systems and the digital workplace channels your employees already work in. So, how do you go about identifying those moments that matter? Those moments where you have the opportunity to really delight employees, save them time, help them not have to dig around and find information or context switch. And so, there's obviously multiple different ways that you can approach this. When working with clients, we usually recommend to start with a high volume transaction, something that will immediately have impact for a large or certain employee population, and really be able to deliver value quickly so employees can see that value. And you don't have to roll out multiple use cases at once, but a handful is usually kind of a nice, so that the digital assistant is hitting the employee with something that needs their attention throughout the day. And I think a lot of times we've seen in the digital workplace and HR space, when other companies have talked about looking at, moments that matter, you may have heard this term, or maybe, your HR teams have maybe used this term. Companies kind of fall into the trap of looking at the employee life cycle and choosing milestones within the entire employee life cycle. So these are things such as employee onboarding, employee anniversaries, employee promotions, and so on. And these are certainly very important events, and events that you should have the opportunity and make the opportunity to delight your employees. But I would say you don't want to limit to just those opportunities, because if you think about it, many times those span years apart from each other. So something like an employee's day-to-day experience, where what we looked at with Joe and Emily, is going to be just as critical for success, or maybe some high volume experiences that you could start with. And it makes sense, right? So if you go to work every day and you're context switching, you can't find information, or you're bogged down with digital friction, they're not going to be able to do what you hired them to do, which is going to lead to disengagement and really large impacts to your business. You could also look at, in addition to high volume items, you could look at things that are important to your business. So maybe there's certain initiatives that your business is trying to focus on for the year. Could be something like employee wellness, where you have different campaigns where you want to promote certain things around wellness, or maybe upskilling is really important to you this year. And you might be able to find ways to make it easier for employees to learn about upskilling opportunities, or take part in upskilling opportunities. Or could be something that costs your business a lot of money, whether it's the most common IT help desk issue, or maybe late approvals for finance. Sometimes those issues that seem like they're not solvable, because it's just like, oh, employees always forget to reset their password on time. You can really take those processes, break them down, and think about how you could create a more ideal process that's easier for the employee, so you aren't having that high volume of IT help desk issues. So once you've kind of just started to look at what processes you may want to start with, you want to map out a few different personas across your organization, so you can effectively understand the different types of experiences your different types of employees have. On the screen here is just a sample where we worked with one of our customers where we started with 6 digital personas. And it's important to note that you might actually have different personas for different user studies that you're going to conduct. So if you think about something like talent recruitment, that those personas might look really different than something like improving the process of employees resetting their password. Once you have your personas, you'll want to go ahead and create a journey mapping. So you want to do a user study. You'll want to sit down with each persona and watch them complete the process that you're evaluating. So whether again it's something like enrolling for benefits or something more broad like their day-to-day work experience or finding something that's really important, get as close to understanding the employee as possible. So again, sit down, shadow them, don't ask them what they do, actually watch the steps that they do because those will usually be different. And once you've gathered information on the current process and learned how your employees are going about the process, this is where you'll want to start thinking about how you could redesign the process. Not based on, it's really hard sometimes to think outside the box on what is possible, but really envision based on the outcome or the employee's intent. Think about what if or imagine if. What would the ideal process be with minimal steps and friction points? We also recommend to clients include your employees in the process. Have employees help imagine new ideas, have them draw out the ideal process on whiteboards, whether it's virtually or in the office. Look at your favorite consumer apps, for example. And when we talk about designing experiences based on intent, I think we looked at a lot of those with Joe and Emily, and Google is a great example when it comes to looking at their search results based on intent. If you think about how Google has evolved over the years, years ago, you used to just get a list of search results, and many times you kind of have to like change your search and get really specific in your search to have Google present the results you were looking for. Now, however, it's almost, Google really is understanding your intent. It's doing a great job at assuming when you search for something what your intent is, and you have to use very little words to get those results. And you don't just get a list of web pages, you also get information and data and sometimes services built right into that search result page. So Google uses intent-based search to help, provide a range of information and data. This is an example of a search result listing page. You see these red cards here. This is a search for the Boston Red Sox, and I wasn't presented with the Boston Red Sox website as the first result that was on the page. But what I have is this aggregation of information from the latest game scores to the upcoming schedule, and even a roster of players where I can use this card-based design to just easily click through all the information that I likely want to look up about the Boston Red Sox. And again, this is similar to the Uber app, where information is being pulled from multiple services or places. But for us as the end users, it's really an intuitive experience based on our intent. If we look at a kind of a simple experience that we did with Joe and Emily, but I think a powerful one is when we saw that Joe received an alert about taking time off. So we all know it's very important for employee well-being to take time off. And there's always that, group or employee population that don't leverage their time that well. And we know that because we have that data sitting in our systems. And so this is a great example we worked with with a client here at Workgrid, and it's something we offer out of the box, but we leverage this data to see if an employee hasn't taken a time off within 2 months, and you can change the time period to send just a friendly nudge to the employee to help influence their behavior, alerting them that it's been more than 2 months since they took time off. This is, again, an example of using the data that already exists in our systems to promote an action. And then let the employee easily see their time off and submit their time off in just a few clicks, all within the same screen. So kind of aligning to that Boston Red Sox example. And so if we were to previously do a user study before this experience, most employees would likely have to log into an HR system. It may not be very complex, but they might have to spend a couple of minutes poking around, digging several layers deep to find where they can access their time off. Then sometimes it might be an additional click to, once you find out your time off, to then submit your time off. And then when we think about it for the manager who needs to approve the process, what does their user experience look like? They usually maybe get like a generic email that an approval is awaiting them, and it's like, again, very generic, and if they're lucky they might have single sign-on, but then they still have to find where that approval sits within that HR system. So why not make approving time off request easier by just simply sending a notification to the managers and letting them approve the request without having to log into the time off system, saving our managers precious time. And also taking a step forward, bringing a little intelligence into it. If we did a user study on, okay, what happens when a manager has to approve employees' time off? Maybe they also have to jump into the HR system or review Outlook to see if other employees on their team have overlapping time off requests. This is where technology can do the work for the manager, which you see in the example here, where the digital assistant is pulling the team member's schedule off, seeing if time overlaps, and then showing that on the approval notification. Again, making the experience of approving the time off request easy and quick for the manager. And the last tip is leveraging your existing digital workplace channels to deliver these types of experiences. We see a lot of technology vendors enhancing their software. And again, there's certainly software that some of your employees will need to be in every day. So, something like Salesforce, your sales reps are probably in Salesforce. A certain HR employee might live in Workday or ADP. But for the general population that doesn't have to access those systems every day, we want to be able to guide their attention to something from that system wherever they're already working. So we don't want them to have to go find the chatbot in ADP to ask a question. They could go to their intranet or Microsoft Teams, ask a question about payroll or whatever the subject matter is, and the digital assistant is smart enough to know to be able to abstract that information from the appropriate system. And so the majority of our joint customers for Workgrid and Igloo have the digital assistant as an omnipresent toolbar that sits right on top of their Igloo digital workplace, like we saw with Emily and Joe. And this is a great experience for the employees because their digital workplace likely already plays an important role, driving that sense of community and culture and really offering that centralized or single source of truth for their employees to access information related to their company and their jobs. And I know, Brad, you probably have lots of feedback on the benefits that your customers have seen deploying the digital assistant right on the internet. Could you share some of those?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks, Janine. Certainly, the internet, as you said, is a great platform to leverage. It's the digital representation of your office. It's your virtual office. Work happens here. So what better place to surface these notifications, contextualize, and bring these apps together where we can within the digital assistant to provide those notifications. So what we see in terms of benefits, we see those personalized, relevant, timely notifications that are helping cement your intranet as that source of truth. So you use the phrase earlier, single source of truth, and that's exactly what we're looking for from a digital workplace, from an intranet, is the idea that we are trying to cement this as a trusted source of information for our employees. So we want to increase visibility of corporate communications. We want those communications to be trusted. We want our employees to be able to find the information they need. And adding the digital assistant to a digital workplace only helps support these overall goals. It helps your employees stay informed. It gives us the ability to manage processes through the intranet. And of course, that's going to centralize it, make it that hub, the place employees return to again and again for information. We can see time savings realized by actioning the notifications that are surfaced through the digital assistant. So that is going to reduce, if not eliminate, unneeded context switching. So again, if a bulk, I shouldn't say a bulk, but maybe a larger task in my day is simply processing approvals, if those approvals are being surfaced, I can review that information within the digital workplace with the digital assistant and just quickly process those approvals. I don't have to shift to another application in order to get that done. The tasks are being done right there. Employees themselves, they can stay on task while receiving reminders that they need, those personalized reminders, things like training, survey data for sentiments, things like that. Recommended reading is another thing that we can look at. So things they should read that would benefit them, they can receive those notifications as needed. Digital workplace managers themselves can ensure their content is timely, relevant, and hitting home sentiment-wise. And certainly, that timeliness and that relevance comes up when we look at that idea of audience reach. If people are reading the content that I'm creating, then I know that I'm doing my job successfully if I'm reaching the audience that I need to. If not, it's a pinpoint to me that maybe I need to change my strategy or change the way I'm exposing things, that sort of thing. So it helps greatly with the idea of that overall digital workplace administration. And then finally, and this is a big benefit, the idea of the chat capability, that chatbot allowing your employees to self-serve for key information. So think, if you will, of an onboarding process. And quite often an onboarding process is a lot of self-directed learning, but we also get into the idea that folks, when they are doing the self-directed learning, they may be looking for resources they can't find, or they may just have one-off questions, things like that. Imagine if they could ask a chatbot, and the chatbot would point them towards the most likely resource. And as we saw, obviously outside of the onboarding example, but with the menu example, pointing them to the resources that matter for their geographic location, that sort of thing. So certainly allowing that self-service, creating that aspect of trust, but also limiting the time that maybe employees are spending on emails or on the phone, asking someone for information they can retrieve themselves. So there's a lot of great benefits. These are just a few of them with overlaying the digital assistant into an Igloo digital workplace. But certainly these are a few great ones to highlight.
Thank you, Brad. I love all those examples. And I think to quickly kind of summarize the tips and some of the topic areas that we covered today is we want to avoid focusing on delivering technology and really focus on delivering experiences for the employee. Move away from a siloed approach to having more of a formal ownership around the user experience for employees, creating experiences that are designed based on employees' needs and their intent versus generic experiences to really reduce that digital friction of context switching and making their day just simpler for efficiency purposes, which will result in a guided experience that is sure to improve the overall employee experience, helping them throughout their day. And I think next we're going to jump into Q&A.
All right. Let's get into some audience Q&A. Up first, we have a question from Brian. How would you shift the behavior in teams to start accepting this method?
That's a good one.
That, Brad?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think one of the things that I've seen work with great success for starters is the idea of distilling it down to finding a willing participant. So when we're looking at a team that we can roll this out to, as Janine said, we're looking at these win points, these areas where we can look at behaviors that are contributing to digital friction, and looking at these processes that we can bring into the digital assistant to reduce that digital friction. And if we can find a willing team that's willing to roll that out, pardon me, there's a phone ringing here and I don't understand why, so apologies if you can hear that. But if we can find someone who's willing to roll that out, then we can take this in bite-sized chunks. We can get a department that can adopt this. We can roll this out in whole or in part. It doesn't have to go out to the whole organization. But we can use them as a case study and use that case study to influence other departments. So we talked about that siloed approach and how this can be a little bit fractured in terms of contributing to the digital friction, but it can also be supportive of reducing it, because if we can get one department that can say, yeah, this absolutely worked for us, then we can get that understanding of how we can roll it out to others and definitely create buy-in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Brad. And I think, one of the helpful things with the digital assistant is we mentioned it can live in your existing digital workplace channel. So it's not something where like a new technology that you're trying to roll out, like, when Slack or Microsoft Teams was introduced and we were trying to really push employees to Microsoft Teams, it's something that exists already in those digital channels. And I think finding departments to test out use cases, what usually ends up happening is other departments say, hey, I want to be able to do, the approvals for if you've done approvals for finance, maybe now expense management teams want to have those put into the digital assistant. So a lot of times it's kind of that snowball effect too. But definitely finding champions, just kind of like how you would probably roll out some other software. But again, I think you do have a slight easier adoption, just given it's not something new you have to push to the employees in terms of like a new software or go to this URL. You want to put it where the employees are already working.
All right, thank you very much. Next question here is from Bradford. Where should the job of friction reduction reside, and where does it typically reside?
Janine, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think, usually where we see the role have the most success, and someone asked a question that kind of is very similar around, should it be a full-time role or should it be a role that someone, is doing two different jobs. We find the most successful companies is when it is a full-time, role where someone is dedicated. They're essentially a product owner, if you will, for the digital employee experience. And they may have like a steering committee or a champion group where they're working with other departments that are very important in the organization, whether it's HR or facilities management, communications, and helping drive use cases that are important to those departments. So maybe again, if they're running company-wide initiatives, you can use the digital assistant to help with those initiatives, whether it's something in HR or something in procurement. But usually where we find the most success for that kind of product owner to live is within IT or like a specialized digital workplace group, or underneath what you might have a digital innovation or end user computing, because you have better connection to IT teams that can help maybe answer questions around, let's look at some examples for ServiceNow or Workday. So being able to partner with, the product owner who runs ServiceNow, your organization, or Workday, and you might not necessarily have, if you're a smaller organization, a dedicated product owner for those systems. But if you are, it kind of can be that person that can work with those people or again, those departments. So we usually, again, find the most success with our customers if it's sitting within an IT role geared towards the digital workplace or end user computing group.
And certainly to build on that point from our experience, looking at the idea of as Janine mentioned, do we have a dedicated role that's responsible for the digital workplace? 100%, that's ideal. But certainly that role can also be supported, can be augmented by a steering committee. You can't facilitate change, or it's going to be a lot slower of a process within an organization without buy-in from the various departments. So the ideal situation would be a digital workplace governance or steering committee that has representatives from all affected departments on it. And it doesn't have to be a case of everybody has a toe in the water, but at the same time, what we're trying to do is affect global change in an organization and really reduce that aspect of friction and really create that love for and trust for the digital workplace. So certainly we see most success where we have a lot of departments involved. As Janine said earlier, it does typically sit within current key departments. If it doesn't have a dedicated department of its own, we do see marketing, communications, HR. It'll live in a lot of those areas, but certainly our recommendation would be that there would be a dedicated person, and if possible, a committee. We have a lot of successful customers that have a steering committee, and that really helps facilitate the greatest digital change, contribute to governance, and contribute to the overall life cycle of the digital workplace.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially for depending on where the digital assistant lives. If it's living on the internet, then it might be an internet owner that's kind of spearheading that. Or if it's living in a different digital workplace channel, it could be the individual that's spearheading that. But to Brad's point, having that kind of committee, so to bring together the right people when you need it.
All righty. And I think that's going to be our time for today. I want to thank you, Janine and Brad, for being here today. Thank you to Workgrid for sponsoring today's webinar. And last but not least, thank you to everyone in the audience for your time and attention. Today's webinar was recorded, and you'll be receiving a follow-up email in the coming days. So please keep an eye on your inbox for that. In the meantime, thank you all once more, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks very much, everyone.